I'm Davy. I'm awesome. And welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling-related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. So last week, the wrestling world lost a true legend, pioneer, innovator. A man, despite all of his controversies, revolutionized the wrestling industry. So revolutionary that a lot of people say he just came into the wrestling scene 20 years too soon. And in honor of his passing this week, I'm going to review the documentary that came out about him in 2006. 20 years too soon. The story of superstar Billy Graham. It begins with him growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, being lower middle class, being poor, but as a kid getting into bodybuilding. Very serious about bodybuilding. But then getting in with the wrong crowd, dropping out of high school when he could have been an Olympic shot putter or something like that. But soon after that, he becomes a Christian. He gets saved. He wants to be in the ministry. And apparently he was going to a really ridiculous church that said it was taboo for a young man to be unmarried, so they basically set him up with a marriage, and wouldn't you know, it was doomed to fail. Nothing in there that says you have to be married, by the way. But from there, gets serious about bodybuilding and ends up meeting Arnold Schwarzenegger before he was famous, and they had become friends. And it's pretty well documented that Arnold Schwarzenegger and superstar Billy Graham were friends for the rest of his life. And then superstar Billy Graham, trying to make something of his bodybuilding, decided to try out for football. And didn't work out in America, but did end up getting into the Canadian Football League, where he played for a year. And being in Calgary, story that seems to happen all the time, went from being a Canadian football player to training with Stu Hart, who he admits, despite the fact that he was this big, huge bodybuilder, and Stu Hart by that time was already an old man, beat the crap out of him. But that was enough to get him into the wrestling business. And then when he gets back to Arizona, he meets a wrestler named Jerry Graham, who gets him even more into wrestling. They formed a tag team, which is where he became Billy Graham. And then later he said on the radio came the song Jesus Christ Superstar, and he was like, that's what I should do. I should be Superstar Billy Graham. And well, that's how Wayne Coleman became Superstar Billy Graham. From there, going into the independents, learning more and more about the psychology of the ring, until he gets into the AWA, which was one of the biggest territories at the time. And he really went over there and made a big difference. Mainly because he was showing that you didn't have to be a technical wrestler to get over big with the crowd. That's mostly what AWA was about, but he was just more of a big bronze showman. And it worked because people gravitated towards him. And it was there that he met Dusty Rhodes, who credits Billy Graham as being one of the guys that showed him the importance of promo work. Then, of course, it goes into how he's working the territories. He ends up wrestling in Tampa, where he meets his wife, Valerie, a woman that would be his wife until he died, which is pretty rare in the wrestling business. And from there, getting to go to New York and work for the, at the time, WWF, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, where he made history, being the guy who ended Bruno Sammartino's historic long title reign. It was also historic because that was the first time that title ever changed hands on a screw job. He put his feet on the ropes. Then it goes into how he heavily influenced some of the biggest characters in wrestling, such as Jesse Ventura and Hulk Hogan, who both admit that they stole a lot from Billy Graham. And obviously, I didn't know that because Billy Graham was a little bit before my time, but when I look back now and see Billy Graham's old matches, his old promo work and whatnot, I can clearly see where Hulk Hogan got a lot of his stuff. The next, it goes into that, his promo work. Being one of the first guys to be that showy and do those kind of promos. He did the kind of Muhammad Ali style promos, you know, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. I'm the Tower of Power, too sweet to be sour. That was Billy Graham, the originator. He had the best promo skills at the time, and honestly, I would put his promo skills against a lot of the wrestlers nowadays. Goes into his legendary feud with Dusty Rhodes, where they had 3 matches, 2 of them being extreme matches, back in a day when that didn't happen as often. They had a Texas Death match, and then it ended with a Texas Bull Rope match, which was the first one to ever happen in New York. Then it goes into his championship reign ending to Bob Backlund, who would also have a very long, historic championship reign. But in Billy Graham's opinion, it was too soon for him to drop the title, and in a lot of opinions of people looking back nowadays. But the thing was, they felt they had to get it off of him because he was a heel who was getting very popular. Now, nowadays, that happens all the time. People are so good at being heels that the fans just gravitate towards them and like them. They're entertaining. Back then, it wasn't done, and they felt that they had to put a stop to it and give it to a white meat, all-American Joe kind of babyface like Bob Backlund. But he did have a hard time dealing with that. It led to him having a very bad depression and started abusing drugs. He took a leave from wrestling, and then when he came back, he tried to reinvent himself, still calling himself Superstar Billy Graham, but he shaved his head. Then again, he was going bald anyway. And also started this martial arts expert persona. Like, had a finisher called the Superstar Chop and everything. It didn't work at all. But then when he went to Charlotte to go wrestle, decided to go back to being the flamboyant Superstar Billy Graham that everybody knew and had fallen in love with. It got him a little bit more popularity again, but it wasn't the same. Especially at one point when he was in the middle of a match, picked a guy up, and his hip went out on him, because it turned out he needed a hip replacement badly. And then after his hip replacement surgery, it became very clear he just was not in condition to wrestle anymore. So in the WWF, now owned by Vince McMahon Jr., they tried to give him other things to do, like tried to have him manage Don Morocco, which was okay, tried to have him made a commentator, which was working out okay, until he needed an ankle fusion, which made it to where he couldn't travel for a while. And it also came to the point that Vince McMahon had to make the hard decision, call him and say, sorry, this is it. Then from there, it goes into kind of the big controversy things he did after wrestling. Like when he sued Vince McMahon, stating that it was his fault for encouraging him to do steroids while he was in the WWF. The steroids that had led to his health very badly deteriorating. In the documentary, though, he admits he was depressed, he was broke, figured that Vince McMahon would just try to settle out of court. But this kind of actually led to the whole big steroid trial that happened in the early 90s. Later admitted that Vince McMahon had nothing to do with his steroid use. Admitted that he started using steroids more than 10 years before he even got into wrestling, let alone the WWF. But of course, even though he later admitted to his own lawyers that he lied, it put a bad rift between him and McMahon. But after his change of conscience, he got back into church, he started becoming a better man, then found out he had liver disease. That should have killed him. They even showed pictures of his liver. It's amazing that he lived at all. But eventually did get a donor from a young woman who had gotten into a car accident, which after his liver transplant made him a big advocate for people becoming donors. Which I'm all for. I'm an organ donor and I believe that takes lives to save lives. But after that, his new lease on life and becoming a new man, shortly after, him and Vince McMahon buried the hatchet, and Vince McMahon invited him to be a part of the 2004 Hall of Fame, which he was inducted into. It kind of ends on that note of him getting into the Hall of Fame and everything, and on a good note. And obviously this was 2006, and he passed away earlier this week, a few weeks shy of his 80th birthday, just due to many health issues. But it's on the WWE Network, and it's still a great documentary to check out. It's encouraging, it's uplifting. It's great to watch if you're a fan of wrestling history like I am. See, I wasn't a big fan of Superstar Billy Graham growing up because, like I talked about, he was before my time. He was big in the 70s. I wasn't born until the early 80s, which means naturally I wasn't really watching wrestling until the 90s. I had heard of him, I knew little bits about him, but when this documentary came out in 2006, it was really cool to get a behind-the-scenes look at somebody who I had been told had innovated the wrestling business, and after watching this, it was clear how he innovated the wrestling business. The flashy, flamboyant characters we have nowadays would not be there if it wasn't for Superstar Billy Graham. So I think the title in and of itself, 20 Years Too Soon, was a perfect title, because that's what it really was. Had he been out 20 years later, his championship reign probably would have been much bigger, much better, because they wouldn't have cared that a heel was getting over. Now it happens all the time. So based on that, if you have not yet seen 20 Years Too Soon, the story of Superstar Billy Graham, then it's on Peacock, the WWE Network. I highly recommend you check it out. Rest in peace, Superstar Billy Graham. So there you have it. That's my wrestling review this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications when I post new videos, and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought of the documentary 20 Years Too Soon, the story of Superstar Billy Graham. Tell me some Superstar Billy Graham memories. Love you guys.